Welcome to the EntreEd Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Toi Hirschman and
Laura McCall.
Join us as we dive into incredible stories from inspiring entrepreneurs around the world.
Whether you are an educator looking for ideas to engage students, a new learner, or someone who wants to be inspired, our guest journeys and their ideas will give you resources to create value and take your own leap into entrepreneurship.
We are so looking forward to sharing our message with you.
And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe to the EntreEd Talk podcast on whatever platform you listen.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the EntreEd Talk podcast. We're so happy to once again be joining a friend of ours in Hawaii. We're waiting for the invite to come to Hawaii with all of our friends, but today we get to talk to Melissa Handy. Melissa grew up in Pennsylvania, where her parents were elementary school teachers. Her love for education started sprouting at a very young age. After high school, she took a gap in waitressing in a diner before attending the Tyler School of Art, seeking a Bachelor's of Fine Art in glass blowing and ceramics. Just shy of finishing her degree, she took a hiatus to have her daughter. She found her way back to college, but quite differently, majoring in computer science as well as learning and getting an MBA with an IT focus. Melissa began her educational career as an administrative assistant to the curriculum director for a very large Pennsylvania public school. In 2006, she left the East Coast and moved to Hawaii, starting a teaching position at Island Pacific Academy, where she taught pre-algebra to 8th grade and algebra 2 to 9th grade. When the school needed an IT or technology director, she jumped into the role. She later found her way to Le Jardin Academy, where she serves as the director of education technology. She considers her role at the school as a coach and a facilitator. Her students are self-paced and engaged in software development. Melissa says her teaching style is very much like her coaching style, where the kids are leading and she's running at the back of the bike with the training wheels. Can't wait to talk about that, Melissa. Her priority is always for students to see their own purpose and recognize that failure is a part of the process. Melissa's guidance is related to content skills that are required for assessment on the international baccalaureate exams. Melissa is the mom to a transgender daughter who is a very important part of her world, and she is proud of her courage. She has written and won numerous grants over the years, including one from NASA, Bayer, Intuitive Foundation, BAE Robotics grants, and HSDM Digital Media. In addition, she's a co-author of an article on makerspaces. Finally, she's very proud to say that her robotics team won the first Tech Challenge state championship 2 years in a row. I can't wait to talk to you. This is so fun. So Melissa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We love Hawaii. The more we learn, the more we want to know.
Aloha.
Aloha. So Melissa, I'm so fascinated. You started started out on the path of a BFA, and then you found your way all the way to IT. That's quite a switch and a pivot.
It is.
Yeah, it's a fun path though. And before we dive into it, can you tell us a little bit about the journey along the way?
Sure. People say to me all the time that switch really kind of surprises them or seems a little shocking, but really being into the technology field and working to solve problems and kind of support people in technology is not a terrible leap from what you're doing in the arts, because as an artist, you're really focused on the human condition. You really care about people and you want to understand the world. And, you have this skill set as an artist where you look really, if you ever see a painter, right, they look really up close at their painting and then they stand back and they kind of look at the big picture. And a technologist, I hope to be the kind of technologist that can do that, where you are able to see all of the different parts of a larger system and then see where you can add a little bit of a dash of red or, a little paint dab of yellow and kind of improve that system. And in support of people, really. So it was a weird journey, but I think in my heart, I've always been an artist. I still am, and I always have been interested in problem solving. And I, from a young age, love technology.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have you, and I'm a little bit mad because Laura we've had a lot of Hawaii folks on here, and Laura did the bio, and she didn't have any crazy big word that she had to figure out how to pronounce. It's not okay. I'm always
I know.
though. It wasn't perfect. So sorry, Melissa, I still stumbled on some of those words.
Well, I should have told her to read the address of our school. It's Kalanianiole Highway.
Oh, yeah, that would have been fun.
Come on, that would have been amazing. Oh, we're just excited to dig into this stuff. I love what you said about the connection between arts and technology, because so many times that's lost on people. With entrepreneurship education, we talk about that all the time, because you've got, it's really, there's so many parallels, and I'm glad that you made that connection, because it's so true.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, what was it like for you growing up in a household full of educators? I mean, I guess obviously that inspired you.
It's intimidating me.
It's wonderful and hard at the same time. Both of my parents worked for the same school district, and they were both elementary school teachers. My dad started his career teaching kindergarten. And so, a lot of the stories we'd have at the dinner table are some of the wacky things he experienced as, I think he was like in his late 20s and he was a kindergarten teacher. And of course, he got ukus a number of times, which in Hawaii, ukus mean head lice. But my parents were really passionate teachers. I mean, they're retired now, but they'll always be teachers. Because they always have that kind of desire to help other people to grow and learn. And so they give great advice, sometimes unsolicited. But the dinner table conversation was always about ways that you can reflect on your own learning and how you can focus and kind of aim for goals, and, how to treat other people. And I think, they just were always classroom community building, but like within our living room, and within the backyard, and all the time. It's like a perpetual school experience.
That's awesome. I like the word for lice is way cuter in Hawaii.
Right? And short and easy to pronounce.
It doesn't sound so bad. Yeah, it kind of comes with the job as a kindergarten teacher.
Right, as a teacher, especially in the early childhood years.
I grew up with that father who's a banker, and our dinner table conversations were like economics, financing, making sure you're secure in life. I think I like the reflection part a little bit better.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that really strikes me, and you talked about what artists do is similar to what IT persons do, is looking in, honing in, and then stepping back. And I think that's a really nice image. We've talked to somebody else recently said, sometimes people forget the forest is still within, the tree is still within the forest. Mm-hmm. And I think as an entrepreneur, seems as if that's required to look inward and then step back and reflect. Clearly you've done that with your career. And I want to hear a little bit more about, so you pivoted from the BFA to a life change and then the IT director. And what led you to, what was the correlation with the MBA? I'm curious.
Oh, well, so when I was a child, I spent a lot of time taking arts classes. You can't tell from seeing me, but I'm like 6 feet tall. And my entire life, I had coaches that really wanted me to be an athlete. But I wasn't. My heart was the heart of an artist, and I wanted to draw and paint. And for a large portion of my teenage years, I carried around a camera, a real like old school 35 millimeter, taking film pictures. And I spent just lots of time in the dark room. I developed my own photos. I was really an artist. And when I was younger, my dad, who was a teacher, had the opportunity to bring an Apple IIe computer home. And my dad was like a real techie, and always was like the first teacher to try to use technology in teaching. And so he really kind of taught me he sort of initiated my love of computer programming, because he would bring home these spiral bound books, and you would would basically type in all this code, and at the end of the typing in the code, you'd get a game. And of course, you made errors throughout, so you had to learn how to debug your code and go back and look and find the errors, but then it was really rewarding. And so from a very young age, I always kind of had this like personal passion for the arts, and then this like, connection with my dad that was really around technology. And so when I was in school and I was, I wasn't a very good glass blower. Let me just throw that out here on the floor. It takes, it takes a decade to really become good at a craft like glass blowing, because it's very difficult. And I was an okay potter. But at a certain point in time, I just realized that the kind of helping that I want to do is helping that's a little bit more concrete. And in the arts, you can make really beautiful things, but so much of what you do is subject to interpretation, and whether or not you're really able to communicate a message, things are so subjective. And I just felt like I needed some more solid. I wanted, maybe to have immediate gratification that I was like having an impact in solving a problem. And so I started working for the curriculum director, and I actually worked full-time as the assistant to the curriculum director in Pennsylvania at Parkland School District. And then eventually decided I'm going to go back to school and get my bachelor's in computer science, because I was doing all of this work for her, where I was, working with spreadsheets and building databases and just trying to do things quickly and learn how to kind of function quickly. Because at the same time, remember, I have a toddler. So I have a really young child. I'm working full-time, mostly remote, back in a time when remote work was not as common. And I'm going to school, taking night classes. And thanks to my parents who are watching my child. But anyways, the switch was really driven by a desire to be more helpful and be more productive in my ability to help people. And so, obviously I come from an educator background. Educators are people who just, are giant hearts walking around on legs.
We definitely agree with that for sure. So I'm curious, with your really awesome background, what does your coaching, your facilitation look like?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, and it's interesting because, you asked about kind of how did I get to the MBA part? I've always been a very entrepreneurial kid. And this will sort of get you to how did I develop this coaching spirit? I've always been somebody who's really interested in starting a business. It's funny because I don't actually have a business, but when I was a child, I had a button business. I sold these, buttons. I tried to start a newsletter and sell it around the neighborhood. I just had this, as a young child, a spirit of wanting to really kind of create. I tried to sell kites. I was like, by the way, my most popular button was "Take my sister, please." I sold it at the neighborhood pool. I love my sister, but at the time, we were young. So I kind of always had that spirit. And my dad, who was an elementary teacher, and my mom, they were both so supportive of that energy, right? They really kind of encouraged me to have that energy. They thought it was adorable. And I think, one time I even went door to door and was trying to sell dirt because I was like, I've got lots of dirt, right? So that's when I learned about supply and demand.
We sold year-old candy. I don't know how my mom let us do that, but yeah, there's some embarrassing selling moments.
So I think that the just role modeling that I had from my parents kind of started that or ignited that coaching spirit in me. So I've never thought of myself as somebody who wants to be that traditional sage on the stage teacher. I've always really wanted to be someone that is in consultation, will help you to kind of move your own goals forward. And, because that's how my parents were. That's really what I got from them. And then, of course, over the years, we always ask teachers, who were the teachers that you had who had the strongest impact on you? And when I do that exercise, I always think of the teachers that really encouraged that student agency, right? That you're just as smart as anybody else. You can, take an initiative and drive it forward. And you have there are teachers who empower kids to really use the natural born gifts that humans have, and that, kids come with more passion than anybody. And that's one of the most important things when you're talking about the entrepreneurial spirit. So that's how my coaching style kind of came to be.
I love it. We've talked, I love the difference between coaching and teaching. We've talked to folks about that, and there is a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you use the word spirit. I think there's a book out there about raising the spirited child. And basically it's like, it's really hard to raise kids who are spirited, right? And Toi and I talk about how do you keep your kids engaged to get bored easily and things. Tell us, what does your classroom look like? And I'm curious, as you being an artist, kind of what is some of the things that you engage them to do in the classroom?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is the art side of me is not so visible, I think, anymore. You build a skill set through the arts, and it really, to me personally, if you want a really solid leadership training, I think I learned so much more about leadership through my visual arts schooling than I did through my MBA program. But when you look at my classroom, it actually looks like just a robotics lab. I am somebody who loves engineering. I am a person who tries to bring a lot of STEM opportunities to our school. I get kids engaged in writing grants so that they can themselves, learn how to support a sustainable program. I am interested in turning everybody into someone who thinks like an engineer. You don't have to be an engineer, but if you think like one, you can be an engineer ballerina, right? You can be an engineer banker, doesn't matter. Your dad could have been an engineer. But so my room just looks like tools everywhere. Lots of equipment. We've got a section of the room that has stuff for pneumatic systems so that you can, add that type of a thing to your robot. There's just a lot of options. I used to teach math a long time ago when I first moved to Hawaii. And when I taught math, my classroom, I had lots of storage of resources. And when you're a teacher that is more of a consultative teacher, the approach is to have lots of opportunities, lots of resources at the ready, so that when you're kind of diagnosing a student, right? Where are you right now? What do you need right now? And a football coach would never have the whole team do something just because these two kids need it. They would, not that I know anything about football. It's funny that I'm saying this, but they're really thoughtful about what do the players need, what, patients, doctors think, what does this patient need? And so to be able to pull out the right resources and deliver those to the student just in time, that's really my approach to teaching. And so my classrooms, no matter what I'm teaching, my classrooms support that. Whether it be, that sort of digital repository of resources or physical resources, the space is available for making it easy for me to grab those things and provide them to students when they need them. And so my classroom, there's not like, I don't have like a bulletin board where I put things up. Because I'm a robotics coach and I teach computer science in my robotics classroom, the room is filled with like robotics regalia because the kids are super into it.
So similar to a lot of what we talk about with entrepreneurship, because thinking like an engineer is design-based thinking, right? And it's solving problems and thinking critically and all of those things we talk about in terms of the entrepreneurial mindset. And so many times we've talked to teachers about entrepreneurship, because a lot of times teachers hear that word and they're like, what?
Right. Like starting a business. No.
What is that? It's more of we're more on the mindset side where it's like entrepreneurship is the why that you're thinking like an engineer, right? You're thinking you're doing design-based thinking for X purpose. You're not just building a robot because your teacher told you to build one and you don't know what it's good for.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're able to do that. I was actually an engineer that became a math teacher and now doing this. So I know I didn't have a school that supported, they weren't mad about it, but it wasn't commonplace to have, like, I came in with like my what are the syringes and the tubes,
right? You're like,
all kinds of things. And I'm like, we're gonna shoot a rocket off today, guys. We're gonna build something with popsicle sticks and pneumatic tubes. And it took like half a year before the kids were like, oh, this is cool, because they weren't getting that kind of experience anywhere else.
Well, I'm really lucky because I teach I will only teach in international baccalaureate schools now. I just love the IB program. I mean, it's not like an off-the-shelf curriculum. A lot of people don't know what it is. It really is a framework for learning. And the first experience I had with an IB school was at Island Pacific Academy, IPA. And it was a school that really wanted to move forward and offer more of a progressive modern education. And we had a lot of parents that were nervous because it was a brand new school and they just wanted their kids to get into college. And so what we were able to do is show them that the International Baccalaureate program, which is a super rigorous program, is something that, colleges really respect, but it is a framework for learning. So I love this, one of our core classes that you take, it's equal to math, it's equal to science. You take it for 5 years. It as a solid core course is middle years program design. You have a design thinking class as a core course. And the way that the IB program works is when you're in 6th and 7th grade in your design class, you are really focused on problems that kind of have a personal locus. But as you move into 7th and 8th, you start thinking on a local scale, like your local community, and you're making connections to the local community. And then, throughout the whole program, you have this thing called global context. So you're thinking about, globalization and sustainability and all these pieces. As you get to the high school years, your design class is really focused on solving global problems. So, we have a student who I can't remember if this was like an 8th grade student, but the focus was on how do you build dog houses that are made out of sustainable materials, right? So, it's just kind of like a cute project that somebody with kind of that personal need for a dog house. In my computer science class, so all of these kids are trained on not just like a simulation, like let's everybody make a windmill, right? Like these kids are trained to look for a specific problem they want to solve, to connect with the audience, right? Connect with the people who are struggling with that problem. It starts off like more personal, but then you have to like go outside of yourself and start to connect with the community. And then they have to come up with real solutions. And there's nothing more entrepreneurial, in my opinion, than training kids to think like problem solvers who can recognize, sometimes the hardest thing to do is recognize the problem. And then, coming up with solutions and following that kind of design thinking protocol is an easy way to prototype and iterate and come up with great solutions. But just being able to identify problems that other people outside of yourself have is so critical. And it's really like an awesome part of the IB program. So I feel personally like I'm lucky to have a school that is super supportive of this kind of energy.
That's awesome. We talk about that all the time with like that empathy piece, that initial piece of, I'm so glad to hear that, because that initial piece, that's really the catalyst for everything design-based thinking, entrepreneurial, because you have to learn how to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And, my problem is not necessarily something that a lot of other people have. And, and exploring that is huge for kids. And then giving them that global perspective on top of it, that builds empathy, understanding, self-efficacy, all of those things. It's really beautiful.
Well, our school's right next to a marsh. And the marsh, we've got all these, species that live in the marsh, and some of them are protected. And you've got, like birds that are like protected birds that, we would not want anything bad to happen to them. And the marsh has this, obviously there's a water scenario where there's sometimes a lot of rain here because we're in Hawaii, it's a tropical place. You get a lot of sort of flooding, and it kind of pushes down some of the fences that the folks have put there in place to kind of protect that space. And so one of our students used to work over there. They picking invasive species is kind of like a big volunteer effort in Hawaii. And I never ever would have thought of that when I lived in Pennsylvania, grew up in Pennsylvania, but this is like a really big effort. And so that one of our students was doing that all the time and feeling so frustrated that, these fences would break down because of all the flooding. And so he came up with a solution that would allow the fence to still be impenetrable, right, by humans, or a deterrent for humans and some larger animals. But he just built something that would allow sort of like a flow of water through the bottom of the fence. And that was his design project. Who would think of that in a school, right? But it's connected to this student's local community and using those design thinking skills, but in the context of a real problem. So anyways, I get excited about this kind of stuff.
Awesome.
We talk to you all day long.
We talk about, I love to use you use the words diagnose. You work with the students first to kind of see where they're coming from. Because I think a traditional classroom just says, you are coming from here, you moved from second grade to third grade, therefore you know this knowledge, and that may not be true. And
Right.
I think too, you, like Toi said, the personal connection, finding what their interests are, and then going global. I mean, you really have taken through a life cycle of learning.
Right.
Talk a little bit more about how the entrepreneurial mindset works with the IB program. I am familiar. My nieces did it, and I agree, it's an awesome program.
Yeah, it's such a good program.
Tell us a little bit, are you pretty specific about putting the entrepreneurial mindset into the classroom, or it just happens?
Oh, no, it's super intentional through IB. So for instance, our younger students, so we start kids all the way in our preschool. We have 3-year-olds who are IB learners. And we have the IB student, there's something called the IB learner profile traits, right? And so it's back in the 80s or 90s, we started talking about habits of mind, right? What are the characteristics of an IB learner? What kind of a person are you as a learner? And so, we've got, it's a list of different qualities, but some that really support this notion of entrepreneurialism. Risk taker, right? Somebody who's willing to kind of try something different. Thinker, somebody who's really focused on that sort of problem orientation, solution orientation. There also is, of course, communicator, which we know communication skills are so crucial, and caring is one of them. So really trying to focus on that empathy piece and building it throughout the program. And so part of being in an IB school, especially in the younger grades in elementary school, is that you're talking about these things as it's not like a poster on the wall. It's part of every one of your connections, right? In the primary years program, we do what's called transdisciplinary teaching. And so there's not you don't have a discrete math class and a discrete English class, right? The way that primary years program units are taught is there's this big idea, right? So there are these, and of course I'm terrible at knowing what the PYP units of inquiry are, but you have this notion that there's, who we are in time and place, or how we connect with our community. And I'm not saying them right, but there's these really big ideas that they're aiming towards, right? And so the students will learn, under the umbrella of who we are, they're going to learn math and science and all of those things together to aim towards that solution. One of them that is my niece. My niece is like a super nature girl. She loves the sharing the planet, right? So sharing the planet, they might, I think it might be third grade, they talk about water scarcity, right? They're learning a lot about measurement and math, so that they're like learning how to measure water. They're reading stories about different communities and how water scarcity affects people. They do a long walk to water where they like have to carry these big jugs of water, and they take this long kind of walk around the community. And, of course, they're learning about the science of water, like pollution and things like that. So it's all together under this big umbrella. And so they're constantly talking about those like learner profile traits. Like, what does it mean to be a risk taker when you're in a situation where you live in an environment that has water scarcity, right? Like, what are some of the things that people feel and do in those situations? So we're constantly teaching to this empathy goal, right? And then in addition, there's something that's like built into the IB program, that you have what's called student agency as a outcome that all teachers are aiming for, to the point where it's like the unit plan has a whole section where you're talking about how do you develop student agency through this unit. And so, that's when, and like here's what homework is at our school and in lower school. I mean, it's lots of reading. You should read all the time, but it's also taking action. Take action from your learning. So what are you going to do as a child to take action from your learning? And it's not like we assign, like we want everyone to build a PSA or to draw a poster of, what you learned about water scarcity. No, they come up with their own thing. So some kid might decide, well, I would like to do something to raise money for the people who are in this location I learned about that are having an issue with water. Somebody else came up with, they used in their design class, they wanted to build a way to filter water, a cheap way to filter water, so that they could, like help these people that don't have clean water. And so it's student driven, right? Because the IB program is inquiry based. So everything is really student driven. There's a unit in second grade where they learn a lot about dirt sharing. It's a sharing the planet unit. And they learn about different kinds of soil. They learn about how things grow in the soil, like what nutrients are needed, and there's like a real science connection there. And I just know that I'm an IT director, so I'm really focused on how do we use technology for learning. So I was observing one of our teachers who was using an iPad in a way that I was interested in observing. And so I'm in there just listening to kind of how this class goes. And it's the teachers come up with lots of possibilities. They start a unit with a provocation, like something that really kind of gets kids interested in and concerned and building questions and stuff like that. And then the teacher doesn't say like, okay, now we're going to open the book to page 7 and read blah, 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 right? Instead, the whole start of a unit is driven by student questions. Like students generate lots and lots of questions. And so you might have a class that one year is really interested in learning more about archaeology, right? Because archaeologists dig in the dirt, and right? And so that unit will kind of go in that direction. And the teachers will find ways to pull in the things that we want them to get in that big picture about. But the kids are the drivers of their own learning, right? And that's what we need everyone to be if we want to build the kind of people that really think about changing the world and creating solutions.
It strikes me that it's such a non-threatening way to teach. It's taking down the barriers of, I'm the teacher, I'm in the front of the classroom, I will listen, and I'm, and most teachers I think we meet are not like that, but at the same time, that's a lot of times what education sets up. And I guess I find it interesting with the whole student input. I would think that draws teachers to want to do more, to want to engage more. And I would think it's like they're getting feedback, but not from their peers. They're getting feedback from their classroom, and that's phenomenal.
Yeah. Feedback is a huge part of it, right? Like if you're if you're somebody who is someday going to own a company or start an organization, you need to really understand who are your customers, who do you serve, right? And the ability to, it's a skill set, right? Being able to receive feedback, being able to interpret feedback, being able to take action from that feedback. That's a real crucial skill set. And it's something that I think that our teachers do really well in helping to develop that. And, you know, what happens is we sort of become this like miniature incubator in a sense, tiny shark tanks, right? We have kids who are constantly, I'm on the leadership team. And so we all the time during our leadership meetings, we'll have a block on the agenda that's a student's going to come in and propose something to us. Right. And so we had a student who took the initiative to bring in vending machines with all healthy food. We had a student with an initiative to go for meatless Mondays. We were going to stop having meat on our campus on Mondays. We had a student that wanted to ban water bottles, and so came in and proposed that we were going to make changes. Right, they're learning about things, and then they're empowered to make changes from their learning, and that's like what the IB program really encourages. It's, you know, and we even have this thing called impact term, and during impact term, kids design their own. You know, we call it a week without walls. But some are 2-week international trips, but they basically say, well, this is the impact we want to have on the world, or this is the concept that we really want to explore. And so the kids, they have picked certain teachers that are going to be their mentors or facilitators essentially, but the kids plan the whole thing, right? So we'll have kids that say, we really want to learn how to sail. And so then they put together a sailing trip. And, you know, they have teachers that are interested in sailing who will mentor. We had kids that arranged for scuba certifications. So to bring people on site in our pool, they did like a scuba thing. I actually mentored 3 students who they say they don't want to be teachers, but they wanted to really help encourage STEM at a Hawaii public school. So we, as a little group, a little hui, we flew over, another short Hawaiian word, we flew over to Hawaii and worked with a public school there. And basically our kids taught the students there how to code with these little Sphero, they're like little round ball robots, and taught them how to do some math, some fun interactive math, taught some CAD software, how to like design 3-dimensional objects, right? And the kids wanted to do that because the kids were really interested in kind of, you know, they picked me as a mentor because I'm always like trying to spread STEM, trying to make everyone an engineer. And they're like, we want to do that too.
Yeah.
But it's cool, it's neat.
Those dinner tables, I envision you guys have created such a seamless process in the education. It seems like you're sitting around the dinner table in your own family. A toddler can participate in a conversation about something they're learning with their brother that might be in middle school because they're all learning something about the same topic. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, it's not us. It's the IB program is just such an excellent program.
I love that you talked about how students are drivers. We encourage that, and I hope that the whole world is doing that. And then this feedback, this idea of drivers and empowering them and showing them how to use feedback effectively. That's basically how agency is built, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's the point. And I mean I think that's just so amazing. But what advice might you give teachers or educators at all levels out there that want to get started on this kind of journey? Maybe they're in a school that's more traditional, but a school that's not quite as IB.
Right.
What could they do to get started? Like one small step?
Well, what I've noticed is that a lot of times what halts us from moving in that direction as educators, and I've felt this myself, is that you're fearful of trying something different because you have a lot of things that are working. And so, there's this sort of nervousness that parents aren't going to be okay with it. or that you, if you provide less structure. Teachers a lot of times think that I need to be the one that's delivering knowledge to kids. And if I'm not doing all of the delivery of knowledge, then the parents are going to say, well, what are you doing, right? How are you actually, why is it worth me putting my child in your school if the kids are the drivers, right? But I think it's super important to have that coaching and consultation role, because it's not easy. There's a real art form to providing feedback that is effective, high quality feedback, right? You can't just say, oh, that looks good. Quality feedback really gets kids to recognize what are the things that are positive and really working, but where are the areas that they could have some growth and why, and also some possibilities for, next steps, like helping them to understand how do you break down projects, right? I always think that, one of the skills that schools don't teach well, and that it becomes very clear when you're somebody who hires people and you got lots of people out in the world who are looking for jobs, not everybody can break down a problem into the tiny little parts and then understand how to prioritize those different parts and move through that project, right? And so I think that mindset around, solutions, that mindset around designing for solutions, I think it's a really complex process, and you need someone to coach you, right? I could say, well, anybody could be a physical trainer. Anybody could, right? But really, that's a very specialized skill set that I know I wouldn't be able to do it. If I would love to lose some weight. I wish I had a personal trainer that could help me make a lot of decisions or guide my process so that I, know what to eat, so that I know how to exercise the right way. And so that, you can't just watch a YouTube video and then be like an expert at that. And I think that, over time, what has happened is maybe our society doesn't, maybe because our teachers aren't very braggy, they're very humble people. Our society doesn't look at teachers and recognize the skill set that it takes to be a real high quality coach, right? In the executive world, we'll spend an incredible amount of money to pay someone to come in and be a high quality coach. But in our education world, we don't recognize that we have teachers that really know how to identify areas where students are struggling. They know how to apply certain solutions to those, and they know how to guide students with the right kind of feedback and encouragement and pressure when it's needed to move them, in the right direction. So I guess my advice is, teachers, you are amazing, incredibly talented people. Don't pay attention to what society says. Trust yourself, because you have the skill set and you know what to do, and start allowing yourself to step back and have the students take over. And then you're that guide on the side, and that guide on the side role is so much more impactful. And if you give it just a month that you test it out, you'll see all of a sudden students don't feel like education is being done to them. They're owners of it. And when they own it, you can't stop them from doing what you want them to do. So I think, teachers should just recognize how incredible they are.
And I think, fortunately, one of the good things that's come out of COVID is I think the world has to recognize that all of a sudden we had a bunch of students at home and parents were at a loss. And I think the role of an educator has been elevated. I certainly hope so. This has been phenomenal. Would love to continue to pick your brain. But unfortunately, we have to head off. We leave it at a driving distance so everybody can hear you as they're driving home on a commute. So how would we get in touch with you? If folks want to hear more about IT or IB or all the wonderful things you've talked about, Melissa, what's the best way to reach out?
Well, the best way to reach out to me is really via email, or I'm a tweeter. I like Twitter, and so my handle is @handym13. But of course, you can always contact me. School, and I'm the IT director, so of course my contact information is all over our website. But yeah, I love to connect. I love to just sort of be with like-minded folks who share the same love for kids and for teaching and learning.
Thank you. We talk about creating a global community, and I think you've definitely offered a lot of wonderful tidbits about how to do that. And I do hope people reach out and connect with you. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. We've really appreciated it. And we're so grateful that you were able to join us today from Hawaii.
Yes, and I will say mahalo, another pretty easy Hawaiian word, and it just means thank you. And I just really appreciated getting to have this conversation. So much fun talking with you gals. And just thank you so much for having me.